of Brownsville will conduct a regular meeting on Wednesday, December 14, 2022 at 5:30 p.m. at the Brownsville Event Center located at 1 Event Center Boulevard, Brownsville, Texas. Members of the public who submitted a public comment form will be permitted to offer public comments as provided by the agenda and as permitted by the presiding officer during the meeting. Mr. Chairman, it is 5:33. You may call the meeting to order.
I now call the meeting to order.
Next item is invocation. Mr. Romero.
Lord, we are thankful for the opportunity to gather and do our work together. We pray that you guide us so that we're open-minded and fair and receptive. We thank you especially for the freedom that we share so that we can be here. Please guide us in the service of the city of Brownsville. In your name we pray, amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, one indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Texas. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to the Texas, one state.
Next item on the agenda is public comment. We do have one public comment. And her name is Ms. Susan Rubalcaba.
Good afternoon, committee. I would like to start by asking you, the members, not to ignore the real reason the committee was resuscitated. Before November 3rd, when was the last time the Charter Committee met? I'll tell you, it was more than 2 years ago. On October 24th, the Commission knew the Charter needed revising, specifically but not limited to any and everything to do with PUB, after receiving a damning forensic report. This should be your focus and your concern at this moment. We are looking for more control over the board. Why? Because it's important that as an appointed board of this magnitude serves the best interests of the public. When they do not, it is important that the city has the ability to step in. And currently, we do not have that ability, and it is the reason we all are here. After more than a handful of meetings, you guys have gone back and forth regarding appointments and removals, as if these appointed members have some of the City Commission and the people. Without a doubt, we are in this situation because PUB became a privately run company with little oversight, and it needs to change. I would suggest, at the very least, change the appointment of the board members to a supermajority. Add that the board members serve at the pleasure of the commission and can be removed at any time for any reason by a supermajority vote. If you do that, the likelihood of a careless or politically motivated removal would take real convincing. The commission should vote on a salary increase of more than 10% in any given year for all top executive employees. Commission should be present during PUB budget adoption. I would suggest to appoint at least 2 board members who are either a CPA, engineer, or have significant experience in the utilities industry. Will it affect PUB's credit rating? None of us know the real answer to that. However, neither the Moody nor the S&P mention independence in operation as a factor. Fitch states that PUB's independent decision-making ability, including those related to rate setting and utility operations, would likely result in a downward rating pressure. That is misleading because PUB never had an independence in rate setting, ever. It is my understanding they have no control other than to recommend to the commission, and then commission makes those decisions. So Fitch must not be aware of that minor detail. If PUB was so concerned or is so concerned with the credit rating, why did their annual comprehensive report for 4 years state that constructing the proposed Tenaska Brownsville generating station and issuing approximately $225 million of additional obligations to finance the city's portion of the facility would result in a significant increase in the total outstanding debt. That debt would have been 77% over the current debt. We lost $9.3 million when it was canceled.
Time is up.
9. I have like one paragraph left. I'm the only speaker.
Go ahead.
9.3 million wasted taxpayer dollars. How in the world will more city involvement hurt the financial status and the ability to repay PUB's debt? I am currently reviewing the PUB board meetings from 2012 to 2017. In October 2012, we contracted 3 legislative and consulting firms at the same time for $10,000 a month. The same time, not 1, but 3. So $30,000 a month for 3 firms that do the same thing. Why? You don't think Fitch would be ecstatic if we prevented waste and fraud? You know what the people got for not having even minimal oversight into PUB? We got $30 million building that's not being used. We got 3 top executives giving themselves a 40% increase in salary, 135 million stolen, and we got a conflicting board who places an implicated CEO on 60 days paid vacation. Please don't give us a weak, scared charter committee who doesn't want to do the hard work and step on toes, because right now, that's exactly the image you're giving. Thank you.
Item number 4, presentation update by City Attorney's Office. City Attorney's Office will provide factual and legal updates based on requests provided during any previous meeting as requested by the Charter Review Committee.
Good evening. Good evening, committee. Can you go to the next slide? All right. So this is our agenda for tonight. You all have it in front of you. Can you go to the next one? And one more. So this committee has been meeting since November 3rd. We have a few meetings left, as you can see on the calendar. There is, this one is one of 2 public hearings, or public meetings that are out in the public. We have the next one coming up in January 18th. And that concludes this particular report.
Item number 5, work sessions. Item number 1, presentation by City Attorney's Office related to Charter Review Committee as directed by the City Commission.
Okay. So real brief, this is something that was presented to the City Commission and I believe this committee early on. And just a reminder, this is the history of our particular home charter. In 1912, the state of Texas adopted the Home Rule Amendment. It is basically our constitution. And I realize a lot of you have heard this already, so this is more for the public. It applies to any city with a population over 5,000, and it basically allows the city the self-governance. There's other cities that are general law cities that are ruled by statute. If you go to the next slide, this is the history. The city of Brownsville adopted their initial charter in 1915. In 1975, we had our first set of amendments. It wasn't amended again until 1993, where we had 12 propositions. In 2000, we had about 5 propositions. In 2010, by referendum of the voters, we had 2 propositions before. And more recently, the charter was amended in 2021, where we had about 10 propositions. Can you go to the next slide? The charter, as well as any other charter in the state of Texas, cannot be amended more than every 2 years, which is the reason why you are here now. It's been 2 years, or it will be 2 years when we send the amendments, assuming there's any amendments, to the commission. It'll be going to the voters. The city commission will ultimately approve what amendments go to the voters. And prior practice has been that, of course, the committee reviews the recommendations, or reviews and makes recommendations to the city commission through a public hearing process, but it's not legally required. Next slide. The most recent amendment to the charter that included an amendment to Article 6 affecting PUB was this Proposition 10. It basically amended the charter to include some cooperative language that would allow the city and PUB to have a more cooperative, collaborative relationship. This passed 4,327 to 520. Next slide. So before us in the last few meetings, the charge from the City Commission has been to review Article 6 based on the most recent events, but it's not just limited to that particular article. As some of y'all had heard at the most recent update to City Commission, we've also asked the Commission to review other provisions of it as well, including entertaining any recommendations from the City Manager's Office or the City Attorney's Office related to any technical cleanup that needs to be done to the charter. It does require, of course, as I said earlier, at least 2 locations where we'll have a public setting. The meetings at City Hall are public setting and they are open to the public. But this is an opportunity, one of 2 meetings, where we can go out to the community and have the meeting out in the public, in a community setting. City Commission, of course, will have the final determination concerning what will be on the ballot, if anything. And of course, the Charter Review Committee serves at the pleasure of the City Commission. And upon conclusion of your recommendation, the Charter Committee will, I don't want to say disband, but it will basically cease to exist until you all are reappointed again 2 years from now. And that's just a recap of the last few meetings that we've had.
Work session item number 2, discussion related to potential Article 6 charter amendments as submitted by Charter Review Committee members, included but not limited to Brownsville PUB, reports to City Commission, discussion and removal of Brownsville PUB Board of Directors, members, and qualifications of Brownsville PUB Board of Directors.
So committee, this particular session was added in case it is needed as a work session. If you've noticed, there are items that are individual consideration for the exact items that were just mentioned towards the middle of the agenda. The reason for that was so that we can allow an opportunity to have a public hearing where if there needs to be engagement or further questioning of a speaker's comments, right? If you want to go a little bit further or ask why they're asking or why they're commenting on a certain thing, that gives you the opportunity to do so. You can't do that in a public session. You can't engage them. That's against our Texas Open Meetings Act. And so this session, if you want, you could table it and then reopen it if you find that it's needed to have an actual work session with staff. So we defer to you all.
But we can only open and close it once, or?
No, you can have discussion right now if you'd like, and then move on to the other items on the agenda. And if you want to reconsider and have the work session, then you can reopen it.
And when you say the other items, you mean within 5?
Within 5, yes, within the items for individual consideration. Oh, I'm sorry, would be number 6.
Yeah, it would be under 6. I'd motion to table it until we can hear from the public, and then we could revisit it once we get some insight from the people here at the meeting.
Yeah, so just for clarification, you can either table it and then reopen it if needed, or you can just move it out of order and go straight to items for individual consideration. We do have one more work session if you want to do that one first, and then move over to individual items for consideration to hear the public.
I'd just like to bump it until we can hear from the people. That's all.
Well, I think what you're saying is if we open it, then this is where we can engage.
Amongst yourselves, correct?
Amongst ourselves,
So
not
the work session
Okay, I
is
see,
staff
I see.
and the committee interacting back and forth.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I'd like to just move it out of order so that we can do the public hearings and then revisit it once we've gotten some insight. And that's my motion.
I second that.
All in favor? Say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those that oppose?
Okay.
Next item, number 3, Discussion related to the salary compensation reimbursement of city commission members.
We can table that
Second.
one.
You want to table this one as well?
I'll second that.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Items for individual consideration. Item number 1, public hearing, consideration, discussion, and action, if any, regarding requiring the Brownsville PUB and City Commission to meet and/or have the City Commission receive a report from Brownsville PUB a certain minimum events per year.
I motion to open to public comment.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Those opposed? It's open. Do we have anyone that has anything to say on number 1?
Is there no one here from PUB who would like to say that, anything about that?
Hello, Marilyn Gilbert, Interim General Manager for the Brownsville Public Utilities Board. I met yesterday with our city manager, and we were discussing the minimum events that we would have per year, and at this time, we're not ready to make any type of recommendation. I need to discuss with my PUB board.
Do you think that this would be putting it in the charter would be an appropriate thing to do? I know you don't want to answer the question yet, but can you just?
My personal opinion is that it's actually two administration talking to each other. I don't think there's a need to put it in the charter, but that's just my personal opinion.
I think that's my opinion as well. I think we want to open up communication between the two entities, and I think that's probably your priority as well in light of Tenasca. So I don't know if I'm afraid we're entering into a micromanagement kind of position when the charter should allow for leadership amongst the two entities. And so, in my opinion, I don't think that would solve much. I just strongly urge that the city and PUB open up more lines of communication. And I know that you're doing that, and we appreciate that. But that's my 2 cents on that.
The chair recognizes David Mayer.
I have a contrasting view, and I am not married to the fact that it needs to be implemented through the charter. It might be through a city ordinance. But I would point out that 2 years ago in this ordinance, the charter revision included better communication, and we still feel like we have an issue. I believe that as things change over time, including administrations, there are tendencies to drift apart, drift back together, whereas embedding the requirement for quarterly or annual or semi-annual, I prefer quarterly reports to the commission in an open forum, I believe embedding that into the charter is a more effective way to guarantee that communication is going to take place. There's no question that there's goodwill between administrations currently. That changes. If we embed it in the charter, we don't have the commission can choose to be there or not to be there. The PUB board is not required to be there, but the report needs to take place. And as I have said, and I'll be prepared to make a motion, Mr. Chairman, at some point, if it's appropriate, that it would require quarterly reports, one of which would be specific to water and sewer, one of which would be specific to electrical supply, one of which would be exclusive to finance, and the other would be an annual wrap-up report. And I suggest that dividing them up is one way to keep it from being a 7-hour meeting or a 2-day meeting. If in fact all you're covering is this year, a report to the commission might say, here are the water and sewer projects that we have underway. Here's how much we're paying for them. Here's how much we anticipate will be completed in the next 12 months. Here's where we think there were future challenges. Here are the contracts that are underway. That sort of thing it'll take more than half an hour, but probably less than an hour. In the commission, to the extent that they choose, would have an opportunity to ask clarifying questions. That's what I believe will embed a formal process by which that communication takes place. And I'll be prepared to make a motion to that effect. But thanks.
I have a question, Will. Can you, not only for my benefit, but for the benefit of the audience, can you briefly explain the difference between a charter amendment that we're voting for and an ordinance that the city would pass? What's the difference?
Yes, so a charter amendment is, well, charter provision really is the constitution of the city. It sets the governance provisions, right? An ordinance is, and that is voted on by the voters, right? There's limited to every 2 years, you can only amend your charter. And there's a process that's set by state law. With regards to ordinances, those are items that the city council, or city commission in this instance, adopt as a body, and they set certain laws, if you will, rules to follow. And quite a bit of, if you're referring to PUB, there's a few ordinances that are already in place that relate to the PUB's administrative processes, right? And those are different. Those are set by the city commission, and they can be amended by the city commission.
Okay, so can an ordinance override a charter amendment?
No.
Okay, so what would the difference be? I mean, I'm listening to what David is saying, and I don't totally disagree with it. My issue along those lines is what are the consequences if those meetings don't take place? City get removed, PUB board members get removed if they don't follow what we put in the charter in terms of, every meetings every 3 or 4 months. What would be the consequences if for whatever reason, the pandemic is a good example, okay? Where they could not meet or whatever reason, what would be the consequences if we put it in the charter versus enacting an ordinance, doing that same thing?
Well, yes, so keep in mind ordinances generally are amended quite often. And so this is not answering your question, but there could be a change in the commission that then causes an ordinance to be repealed or amended, right, to favor that particular governing body's direction for the city. With the charter, it's the voters that end up deciding. But as far as your particular question,
the
consequence, thank you. An ordinance quite often does not have, in some provisions dealing with governance, like our administration, chapter 2 of the Code of Ordinances, they don't have provisions in there with penalties.
How about the charter?
The charter does. If for certain violations of the charter, a commissioner could be removed from their position.
Well, we're talking about, what Mr. Merrill is saying is having these joint meetings, which I think are a great idea, but what happens if they, for whatever reason, they miss that meeting, they decide to compile it for the next meeting, something happens, and there's no 3 meetings a year?
Yeah, and I think the answer to that is we can put in a penalty provision that removes.
Well, I know, okay, so that means you would remove,
Yeah.
and I'm just throwing this out there
Sure.
because we don't want to go down a path that we pass this and then don't look at the consequence if something should happen. Are all the city commissioners removed, along with the PUB board members at the time, because they failed to meet or follow the charter?
I think nothing happens unless there's a lawsuit, right?
Well, and keep in mind, that's correct. With regards to that, if there is a requirement in our city charter that's not being followed, then the citizens
Anybody
can
can file a
sue.
lawsuit.
Yeah, anybody that has standing can sue the city to force that hand, right? With regards to our current charter, there are provisions for removal of certain commissioners for certain actions, right? Violating the charter. If you add this one, those penalty provisions would have to be modified to include a penalty for them not meeting 3 times a year with PUB, and same thing with PUB.
Would that language also be on the ballot?
If it is recommended
Yeah,
by the
let's
body.
assume that we move forward and we follow Mr. Merrill's recommendation doing this, and it passes, everything goes. would that be on the ballot also, identifying what the consequences would be on that ballot?
It
Doesn't
would,
have to.
it would be a different proposition, but yes, you could have that as a recommendation.
be on there.
Yeah.
But no, that's if you want to, like if you choose.
That's if you want to add penalty provisions for
Okay.
this.
Absolutely.
The
Article
chair
6.
recognizes Mr. Merrill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to clarify one point that perhaps I didn't do a good job of covering for Mr. Coscos. I am not proposing that it be a situation where a city commissioner is bothered by or troubled by or penalized for a failure to attend a city commission meeting. That's all covered. I'm saying that the PUB staff, accompanied by whichever of their officers would like to be there, or board members, would make a presentation in an open forum, not unlike this is today, where they covered those topics. If the city commissioner chooses not to attend, that's their business. It's not
If the
something
city
where.
commission chooses not to attend, then we're at the same place that we are now.
It's a toothless tiger.
No. It's a problem that doesn't need, it's a problem looking for, it's a solution looking for a problem, I beg your pardon. We don't have any indication whatsoever that PUB would ever decline to make a presentation on any of those topics. If the city commission wants to be informed, and they run with the intention of being well-informed, not only about the regular business of Brownsville, but about PUB, they'll attend the work session and they'll ask clarifying questions. But if a city commissioner, for whatever reason, is unable to or chooses not to attend, it's a public record. It'll be on Facebook, just like everything, or on the YouTube site for PUB, whatever, and they can attend. The presentation is the important part. The receptor is the city of Brownsville, the citizens of Brownsville who have an interest, and the commission. And one of the things that happens as a result is a city commissioner will not be in a position where they can say, I've never had a chance to ask a question. But the penalty is no different from if they fail to attend any other city commission meeting.
Go ahead,
Go-
it's public.
Go ahead.
Thank you for coming up.
I would just ask that you review Proposition 9 and 10 from May of 2021, where we voted already to have a collaborative effort between PUB and the City Commission and all of the boards, which would include the PUB board. That didn't happen. Ms. Golonsky was here a couple of meetings ago and said that they failed us by not doing that. And I'm not sure if one of the PUB employees that have been here for the past year or two, since May of 2021, can remember any meeting that was held for the public to review any of that. So we've already been here, we've already done that, we've already approved that through a charter, and yet it didn't happen. So I would ask that you take a look at that and figure out how to make it more of a mandatory thing without micromanaging, but at least so that it's a collaborative effort that is in front of the public and we know that it's happening. Because if you give them a choice, like we've given them in the past, it didn't happen. And I don't just blame PUB, I blame the City Commission for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's very insightful.
And I was going to raise this. Mr. Mike Perez, a couple of meetings ago, had mentioned that there was a meeting.
Exactly. I just
Yeah.
wanted to reaffirm that. It was, I believe it was December the 14th of 2022, where the city commission had asked
Of what
us.
year? Of what year, Mike?
2021, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're not there
Sorry,
yet.
Yeah.
It's tomorrow. We're having
Myself,
it
He's a
tomorrow.
fiscal year guy.
It
Yeah.
was,
Today is the 14th, right? So
yeah.
December 14th
It was a
of
great meeting, by
2021.
the way.
So anyways, the city commission did ask for us to come in and report on some major projects. So it was Mr. Brusiak, myself, and another director, Marie Leal, that attended the meeting at the city library where we reported on those major projects.
But these major projects that you all talked about were infrastructure projects, correct?
No, not necessarily.
Okay, what were they?
We did speak about the AMI. There is some infrastructure there. We talked about the rates study that we were currently conducting, and we talked about the rate rollback. And then, yes, we talked about the new annex building and the new building over at 511 and the new water tower over by the Southmost area.
Was the
Those were the
Tenasca
big
project brought up at the time? Just curious.
I'm sorry?
Was anything related to the Tenasca project brought up at that time?
It was the rate rollback.
I'm sorry?
The rate rollback?
Okay, but I'm
We were
talking
having
about
discussions at that point.
Yeah, the
on
actual
Tenasca.
Tenasca project and
The
how that was going or not
Expenditures,
going?
no,
Okay. Was anything on the financial side spoken about?
no,
Okay, so nothing was spoken about PUB's operations, finance, bond ratings, lack of bond ratings, or nothing like that?
no. And you
Okay.
know, the city was the one that requested the particular projects. Or didn't select the projects, but that was the topic.
The city selected the topics that they wanted to.
Well, the topic was to come in and do a report on major projects.
Okay.
We weren't asked to do any
Well, see, going
financial
back to
presentation.
David's point, I don't disagree a whole lot, other than the way it's being presented. It's a toothless tiger. There's nothing, if it happens, or, you know, whenever these charter amendments get passed, they don't get voted on just for, you know, for field art. There's a purpose for them. And when those charter amendments are not followed, I believe there should be a consequence for not on somebody's part. Now, you're right, David. I mean, the city doesn't have to show up, and I'm removing them. Then you throw a party and nobody shows up. PUB decides to call it. It should be the city commission that's calling for these meetings, not so much the PUB calling for the meetings. It should be the city commission. But if nobody shows up, then what's the purpose of it? There's got to be some kind of a penalty or consequence for doing this, or else we're just doing what we just passed a couple of years ago, that let's talk, everybody talk, and you talked one time. That's what I'm hearing, one time. And so that, unless you want to, David, unless you want to do it 3 times.
I think,
Unless?
I want to clarify that, is there anything in the charter that prevents the city commission from setting these meetings and setting agendas to discuss this with
No.
you?
The-
Yeah,
the
from my
charter provides
understanding, they can
oversight.
set them at any time.
No.
And so I think
They
we need
just have to
to,
request them.
I think we need to be careful as to mandating commissioners to do things when we can do that through elections. And so if we submit this to the commission and say, look, we want to have quarterly meetings, and they do that, then there's nothing that would have prevented them from doing it through an ordinance anyway.
Yeah.
And in an ordinance, they could also put in there any penalties that would be required if this isn't done or anything. And I don't think there's anything that would stop them from
Correct.
putting that in an ordinance, right?
Yes, correct. And I want to be clear, currently, right now, there are, other than a recall, there are no penalty provisions that remove a commissioner for violating. There is as committee member Zamora had mentioned, there is the possibility of a resident withstanding suing the city to enforce us to act. But with ordinances, yes, you can include penalties. A good example is the ethics ordinance. The ethics ordinance has penalties in there where a commission member can be censured, fined, etc. Now, some charters do have removal provisions for violation or commission members. We're not advocating for or against that. But if you're going to have a charter provision that requires something and you want to have penalties, then you can have that in there. The problem with that is it doesn't allow a lot of grace.
Doesn't allow what, I'm sorry?
A lot of grace for missing a meeting. So maybe somebody can't miss because of sickness or they're out of town or something, then it won't provision as excuse.
Ability to have oversight over PUB. And they currently have the ability to do that, they're just not doing that. And so I don't know if, mandating them to do that or just saying you're not doing your job, we're not going to elect you is the way to address that.
Another way to address it too, and I know we're don't want to leave from the scope of a charter election, but besides an ordinance, the city's also in place interlocal agreements with PUB that spell out certain responsibilities that are those ILAs, what we call them ILAs, interlocal agreements. Those ILAs are based off the provision that was adopted in 2021 by the voters, right? The collaborative effort. And so through those agreements, that's how we set out how we're going to effectuate that provision. We're still currently way as well where we have those requirements. Of course, the penalty there would be, it would be a breach of contract.
I would support proposing an amendment that mandates at least 2 meetings per year session, or both parties would come to the meeting and inform each other. It's a two-way street. The PUB staff needs to be aware of what the city's planning long-term, the same as the city staff needs to know what PUB is planning long-term. So really, there just needs to be open communication. And if City Commission and PUB Board should also be aware of what is coming. So I would be very supportive of an amendment like that. I think the voters would too.
Yep, I would as well, and I understand the toothless tiger, aspect of it, but I think really it's the community, right? So even us, we need to hold everyone accountable to make sure that they're having their meeting. So I'm happy, that, well, right now we have one member from the public community, but it's just something that we need to hold everyone accountable for. So I would be open to doing 2 meetings without any extreme consequences.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Mayor.
I would just point out a couple. I really want to beat the drum loudly on the issue that the presentation that I'm proposing is a presentation on behalf of PUB to the City Commission in an open workshop type session. The City Commission commissioners may choose to attend or not attend. There's no penalty for them if any different from any other meeting if they do or do not attend. However, if I were a city commissioner, God forbid, I would never want to be the city commissioner who blatantly didn't attend the meeting when PUB is the top discussion around the city on a day-to-day. I would want to be the one who attended and asked the good questions. The other thing I would point out is that one of our previous motions, and I believe it passed, was that a PUB board member could be removed for breach of fiduciary responsibility. If PUB failed, which I don't believe for a moment would ever happen, but if PUB failed in some way or resentfully said, no, we don't have to report to you, if somebody did that, that's a fiduciary responsibility that the citizens of Brownsville have given them by charter. And that is that recognizes that a breach of fiduciary responsibility could very well lead to somebody being removed from that PUB board at the discretion of the City Commission.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that. Does the PUB board, is there a legal fiduciary responsibility for full disclosure, and do we know?
The board members?
The board members?
So my question would be, I know that the PUB is a created entity by the charter. I don't know how they are filed with the state of Texas, but, and I don't know, maybe their acting director might know. I haven't looked it up in Secretary of State.
In other words,
But generally, depending on how they are incorporated, they would have fiduciary duties anyways as board of directors.
Okay.
Right? So if they are an unincorporated
those duties are
association.
to PUB,
Yeah, those duties would be to PUB, not to the city.
the taxpayer.
Correct.
Well, to this charter.
May
which
I
establishes-
approach?
Yes.
Thank you. I do know that right now that the city ordinance require for our board members to file their, I guess, obligations that are like all the other boards. At this time, they're filed with our secretary at the board, and then the board submits it to the city with information. So that is filed. As far as, if they're current or not current or anything like that, if we know it's on our billing, then we do send reminders and talk to our board members on that. Other things that are tax related, we don't have a way of knowing if they're current or not current. That's up to the city, but I'm open to any suggestions or to help improve the communications on here administratively.
I think I would support something I
Hold on.
I'm sorry, just to clarify.
Yeah.
So besides being a created entity by the city's charter, they are incorporated as a nonprofit corporation. So they would have fiduciary duties, but it would be to the entity, not to the city. Technically, the taxpayers are the shareholders, if you will. So they would have some duties there as well.
The ratepayers,
The ratepayers, yeah.
not taxpayers.
I have
Not
a quick
taxpayer
question for Mr. Pettis. Mr. Pettis, at the meeting that y'all held at the library, were all our city officials there? Or were there some missing?
If I remember correctly, they
They were all there?
Also,
Okay.
Yes.
I would support something similar, but through ordinance, David. I think if we can, and it may be outside of our purview a little bit, but since we're discussing putting it in the charter, to Susan's point, and I think Tomas's point, it already allows them to do it. And if we urge them to set up those meetings and create an ordinance that does it, I think that in time, if that becomes so routine and it fixes the communication problem, then maybe, down the road, another charter review committee could say, hey, you know what, we like that. Maybe another controversy comes up and they stop talking. And then at that point, maybe in the future, they can consider putting it in the charter. But I think we're going down a dangerous precedent if we start micromanaging the relationship between the two entities, because we have experts in both the city and PUB that do this for a living. And so I think I'm opposed to a charter amendment, but I would support an ordinance.
I think in a report, we could say that. We could say that, such action is recommended by ordinance.
Yeah, I would support that.
So,
Should we,
so this is, my first time on the charter review, and I did want to, I guess, get some guidance from you all as to how this would be submitted to the city, because I think someone's proposing something, and then there's amendments to it, and then going back and forth on discussions. But ultimately, if we can't come to an agreement, I think we still need to submit something or several things to the city. And so are we able to basically make a proposal, have it seconded, and then that goes to the city, and then each one of us can say yay or nay, but at least they see that we have multiple proposals, and then we let the city commission have the arguments that we're having here today?
That's exactly what happens.
I would love to have that. So, yeah.
When we did, as an
I think
example,
that's
when
what
we
we
did
can
term limits, the term limits were 4-year or 2 terms for everyone, and then whoever was a district commissioner could move on to being a at-large, and then mayor if they wanted to follow that path. That's the way we presented it. When it got to them, they just said, you serve 2 terms, and you can only run for mayor after that.
Tomas, I think on your point, at the end of the day, the city commission is the charter review.
Right.
Okay? We are surrogate. So I think that recommending whatever we want from here, no matter who's proposing it, recommend it to the city. Let them make the decision as to what they want to pass on to the voters, and not necessarily use us as a buffer, saying, well, that's what they wanted, so our hands are tied. Because, Vito, if you remember, the last time we had some amendments that were totally ignored or changed by the city commission.
And some of
So
them
at the end of
were
the
about
day,
PUB.
the city is the charter review committee.
So then we give them the recommendation, and then.
It's up to them, that's right. We can give them
Yeah.
David's, whether we all agree or not, let's give it to the city commission, let them decide, how, if they want to move forward with the 3 meetings and the consequences, if any, et cetera.
Yeah.
So then I would suggest almost the spreadsheet that you all had for us.
Yeah, exactly.
presented, except have the actual
Language.
in there, and then have each one of the members that either voted for it, approved it, or even make a recommendation
Correct.
for an ordinance, and then notes for it, and that's what's presented to the city.
I suggest right now we listen to the last comment by Ms. Gilbert and then close public hearing so that we can,
Vote.
make, entertain motions
Okay.
on this item.
Unless there's anybody else
Anyone else have anything to say?
on this topic.
There we go.
Yeah,
Yes, Ms. Gilbert.
thank you.
You might as well just get a chair and just
Yeah. Mike?
save yourself the long walk.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to make a point of clarification. We did look into nonprofit, and so our board attorney will be in contact with you to make some of those clarifications on that. But on the other thing, I just wanted to make sure that the PB is part of the city and an agency, so our board members are subject to the many requirements, that applicable to city commission, including that conflicts in their local government code, and they also get the required training that we need to provide to the board. And so not only on the ethical, but other things. We're in the process right now of having a book made that has all the training guides that need to do as a new board member comes in, the various different, obligations with the Texas Open Meetings Act or the competitive matters or anything like that. And Mr. Cascos, I hope you did get a copy of the question that I forwarded over to Ms. Helen Ramirez,
did,
and
I
I've
didn't-
sent
I
it
didn't-
over. No?
don't
So
recall.
we did provide you a 5-page report on that, that we was forwarded to the city attorney's office. But I
Well,
did
did
see
you-
the email from Ms. Helen
you
Ramirez
send
sent
it?
over.
I don't remember seeing it.
If we haven't sent it, we will send it after this meeting.
Thank you. And so I just wanted to make sure that we are being responsive to some of the questions. And on the other note, on some of the other questions about recommendations from the board, I did talk to the board chair, and I'm in the process of working through the board to get comments back at this time, but I'm not prepared to answer on any of these questions, but I hope to get some feedback in the near future.
I would recommend that whatever commentary the board, again, we don't have another situation where the tail's wagging the dog here, okay, with all due respect to everybody. Send them to Will so he can disperse them to us so we don't have any issues with
Right.
forums.
Will do. And that's why we followed protocol, sending them
Got
to
it.
the city manager, and city manager forwarded on to the legal department.
Thank you. Daisy, did you have a motion to
I
close
make a
public hearing?
motion to close public hearing.
I'll second that.
First, I think there's a motion to close public hearing.
On item number 1 only, right?
On
Item number one,
only.
correct.
Yeah.
So I motion to close public hearing.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay.
Okay, do you want to make your-
Item number 2.
Hold on.
No, we're gonna,
Now we're gonna,
We have action on that item.
we have action on
All we
this
did
item.
was just close public hearing.
Will, do we follow the protocol properly there?
Public hearing, you can have now discussion and action.
I think we kind of had the discussion as we were
Yes.
talking.
Correct.
yeah, I'd motion.
I would agree.
Okay. No,
No, you do.
I don't mind making a motion, and I'm used to losing, so it's okay. I would just preface it by saying that if you were to judge the level of interest in the Brownsville community and in this particular topic, I would say that the level of interest is high enough that, and there is an expectation of some fairly decisive and clear change. Thus, I would make the motion that I've been discussing all along, and I'm open to, I expect that there would be two alternatives. One of them is through the interlocal agreement, and the other is through city ordinance, that those two things, it could be accomplished. But I think the citizens want something specific that they can say, yes, we support this. And that's why I would make the motion that the city charter would include a provision for quarterly meetings, quarterly open public city commission meetings where the PUB staff present on specific topics regarding PUB activities, finances, contracts, and so forth. And there's a better way to say it, but basically it would be 4 times a year. It would be 1 time on water sewer, 1 time on electrical, 1 time on finance, and 1 time that would be a big wrap-up at the end of the year.
Is your motion for a charter amendment or for?
No, my motion is for a charter amendment because I believe that's what the citizens are expecting.
I'm going to second that and punt to the city and let them figure it out.
All those in
Do I
favor?
second that?
Yep.
Aye. Those that oppose?
Nay.
I actually want to, I'm a nay on that, but I think it passes anyway.
So that's, Tomas, were you in?
I have a recommendation.
I'm in favor of sending it to the city.
Okay.
Not necessarily in favor of whether it be a charter or interlocal agreement or city ordinance.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, they're going to have that prerogative, right, to change. I think the message we want to send, and also just a reminder. I mean, I know we keep saying the community, but we are actually, I mean, everyone here on this panel is representative of the community. So it's the commonality that we all want for the city and PUB to improve their communication so that we can avoid any situations in the future. So I think this would send the message, so I said yay, or aye, for, I would say city charter, but they can decide if they do it in
Well, I mean,
a different way.
that's a given though, right? I mean,
Hold
they're,
on.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think the motion's
Yeah,
passed
I
already.
think the motion is passed.
But I'm just confused. Is it that,
Kim, roll call.
are we giving them the option, or are we recommending it?
Yeah.
they already-
I'm
No, we're
saying
recommending
yay,
it.
aye for charter. In the end, that message is gonna get to them. They'll decide if they want a charter ordinance or whatever, maybe just to ignore it. It's gonna be ultimately up to them. But I think the message that I wanna contribute to send is that you must improve the communication between the city and PUB so that we prevent any issues going in the future.
On the particular motion that has been first and seconded and we've had vote, can we have a roll call vote on it?
Yes, there was, Daisy Zamora's was a nay. Mr. Cascos was a aye. Mr. Martinez was an aye. I was an aye. Mr. Gonzalez was a nay. Mr. Tejeda was an aye, and Mr. Merrill was an aye.
Okay, I get, if we're doing it that way, I would motion, can we move on to the next?
Yes, we're now at the next item.
Offer an additional minority report that would say.
Item number
we
2.
prefer this.
Public hearing, consideration, discussion, and action, if any, to require that the city commission ratify the Brownsville PUB annual budget included and/or limited to personal costs.
Mr. Chairman?
I have a quick question. With each, I have to open up to public comment, correct?
Correct.
Yes. I make a motion to open public hearing.
Okay, I second that.
Wait, can we go back to?
Can we go
the
back?
board
I mean, I would just like to make a motion on the prior item. In the alternative, recommend to the city an ordinance that does exactly that, the same thing. Even though it's not a charter amendment, I would
And
support that.
basically, Mr. Chairman, I'm open to, and I believe that there should be, if there is a minority opinion that is held, that that minority opinion should be expressed to the commission.
Yeah.
And it might be in the form of a resolution or a vote or
So
an amplification of some kind.
Just for clarification, we've had a first, second, and a vote on item number 1, so we've passed that. For us to reconsider it, we'd have to have the party that had won
Yeah,
that particular
I don't
matter
think you're
bring it
saying to
forward.
reconsider it. I think the vote is done.
Oh.
What you're saying is,
An alternative.
as an alternative comment,
Yeah, it's too late. We've already-
It's too late?
Yeah.
Okay.
And as we're, not to go off the topic, we're now on item 2, but we will be taking, in our report, those items that didn't pass, so they can see what the discussion was.
Okay.
And I think there's an opportunity to vote on the final language later, so that
Yeah.
will be an opportunity to.
Maybe amend it to
Yes.
say both,
Just-
one or
yeah.
the other,
Exactly.
and see. Okay.
Okay.
But now we're on item 2.
Where you at? Item 2, there's a motion to open.
second?
There's a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay.
Now we're in a public hearing on,
Should just read it back. Can somebody just read it back? so
We're
the
open to public hearing, aren't we?
Yes,
Yes,
we're open to public
we are.
hearing.
If there's anybody. If not, I'll just speak. This charter review process has been a great learning experience. I've spent endless hours reading materials, reading the charter, reading related ordinances, and speaking with people who are a lot more knowledgeable than me about city processes and PUB processes as well. There are 2 important things that I've come away with. Well, more than that, but I'll narrow it down to 2 right now. Charter currently provides the city adequate oversight to understand the plans, the execution, the financials, really everything about PUB's operations. However, it is very possible, highly likely, that many people in city government were not aware of the oversight that they actually had, or have had for a long time. And that's not something that we can really fix here, we can address here, but that may be part of the problems, really. Even when we first convened in this committee, we heard that the city did not really have much oversight, which I doubted from the simple fact that there was a forensic audit conducted, and the city clearly had the authority to do that. But and it was done, and that, so there you go. That really is the process working the way it should be. The second takeaway is that PUB and the City of Brownsville are two organizations that can have different priorities. Oftentimes, their priorities are aligned, and their priorities are aligned for the benefit of us residents of Brownsville. But that's not always the case. Sometimes the priorities are at odds with each other. Not all the PUB ratepayers or not all City of Brownsville residents are PUB ratepayers. There's about a 15% of Brownsville residents who are not served by PUB. But even aside from that, even if PUB was trying to serve its shareholders, the ratepayers, they also have to serve the City of Brownsville. And we've seen this with the transfer of money, that it's about 10% of PUB's revenue, and that even in the event of, for example, last year when there was a huge weather-related event that caused PUB to be in the red, they were running a deficit for the year, they still owed the city of money a lot more money than usual. It ended up being about $9 million extra that were from the usual amount that got paid to the city. So the city had a surplus and PUB had a deficit. Now, I'm sure that the city made very good use of those funds, but it's still something that hurts the ratepayers. The other instance when we're seeing that there could be a clash in priorities is talking about the TANASCA funds and what is going to be refunded potentially to ratepayers. A big chunk of that money, about $11 million, has gone to the city in that transfer of money, PUB giving money to the city, which is legal and it's a very standard process. But if the PUB board members decide that they would like to ask the city to refund that money so that they can refund it to ratepayers, that is going to be at odds with the city priorities. And so who can the PUB board serve? The PUB can serve its ratepayers really only if they're independent from the city. They cannot do both because those priorities may be at odds with each other. In the current item that we're considering is to allow or to have the city commission approve the PUB's annual budget. And again, like those priorities can be at odds with each other. So I would urge my fellow committee members to consider what can happen, if we give more power to the city and and what would be the end result for ratepayers?
I'd like to respond to that. First of all, there's only 6 utilities in the state of Texas that are owned by cities. One of the ones that we look to as a guidance is San Antonio, and that their transfer is actually 14% versus our 10%. I'd also like to say Winter Storm Uri was an extraordinary event, as we know. You know, many things were down. We worked very much hand in hand with the PUB to be able to give many of the press conferences were held actually at our EOC, at our city library. What I would like to make clear is that we do not have an $11 million fund set aside from our budget, right? When the city budget is comprised of 71% of the budget really goes to officers, fire, employees, 91% of the police officers' budget, 91% of our budget goes with regard to police officers is just for police officers. So I do want to make it clear, the 11 million was used for much of light and heavy equipment, just basic equipment that we need that the city needs. We have $67 million for deferred maintenance on our roads and $160 million in drainage on deferred maintenance. So I like to make clear that that money was identified and utilized for some basic maintenance. And we do not have a fund set aside like the Tanasca Fund that we haven't been used. All that money has been.
Yeah.
On the, you said six MOUs? I thought there was more in Texas.
No, I believe there's 6 city-owned utilities in Texas.
Yeah, if you recall from our first
Yeah, I think
presentation,
there's like 72 in
there's
Texas.
several,
No?
but they all have different makeups. And so I think what Ms. Ramirez is referring to is 6 that are almost identical to our setup,
What does that mean, almost identical?
where the PUB is its own created entity. If you recall, there's other cities where, for example, Denton, I believe, the city commission or their city council serves as the board. San Antonio has its own makeup as well.
McAllen has a board that is independently elected.
Ms. Gilbert, were you gonna say something? I saw you stand up there.
Let's just stay on the ratified budget.
Hi, I think one of the differences is, I'll go ahead and give you some statistics from the Texas Public Power Association to give you those results. Some of the other cities that are quoted may have different makeup, meaning they're only utility for water. San Antonio is one of those that has an actual board for water and an actual board for their electric and gas. PUB has both electric, water, and gas. And so I think to avoid any type of confusion, we'll be able to give you that representation accurately. And PUB is one of those that is part of the Texas Public Power Association. So the difference between quoting a utility that only has water and wastewater operations is very different, because the electrical operations is a very complex. And even those that are within the electric market within the state of Texas, those utilities that are in the electrical, not everybody has the same requirements, because there may not be part of the bulk electric system. Some of them may be wires only, which means transmission providers. They may not have the same protections. And so before we start comparing the various different boards and how they operate, I think it's to understand the nature of the utilities being compared to.
I think maybe,
Okay.
I think to Daisy's point, I think you're identifying possibilities where the city could be at odds with PUB. And you mentioned something interesting when you referenced McAllen having an elected board, utilities board. I've batted that idea away just because I've been very worried about the bond rating. I think that Carlos used stranglehold, and I think I've suffered from not wanting to do anything, almost paralysis by analysis, if you will, because I just waiting for somebody to give me clarity on what Finch was talking about when they cryptically said, we're worried about independence, the independence of PUB and its ability to govern itself. And just being candid with everybody, I've been stuck on that. I think I articulated that last time. What I've realized is that I don't think there is an answer to that. And McAllen has an elected board. You know, we've heard from the public. You know, they want accountability. And the appointment system, as it is, doesn't allow for oversight, right? Especially with the unanimity to remove the members. But if we adjusted this and we had accountable trustees, I think that that may preserve PUB's independence and ability to govern itself more than adjusting and putting a Band-Aid by removal by supermajority. Honestly, I've had trouble with this idea, but the more I think about it, it's both responsive to the public, preserving the independence of the agency, and doesn't allow the city and PUB to pass this political football around, which it would circumvent the communication issues, because then the voters could have their own independent district trustee, let's say. I'm having trouble batting that idea away, and I want to hear from the.
Let's first stay on number 2.
Yeah.
And then we'll.
On the budget
on the
ratification, yeah.
Because we're
So-
getting off subject.
Yeah, so
and-
we're
and-
currently in a public hearing regarding item number 2, require the city commission to ratify the PUB annual budget, including and are limited to personnel costs. And so I don't know if there's any members of the public.
Mr. Chairman, I'll have one just a quick. I'd love to hear anything that city citizens have to say about it, but I'll just point out that in regards to the city commission approving a budget, I think I talked about leverage once before. A city commissioner could very well be somebody who has an interest in land development and might insist that they're not going to approve a budget for PUB until they get a favorable decision out of PUB on some process that's taking place at land development. I think history, if we got into if we really were able to get to the nitty-gritty dirt level at PUB, we'd find that that has happened in the past, that there have been times when the city commission wanted privilege, or when the board members at PUB wanted privilege. I think approving a budget, I would be in favor of the budget being acknowledged where it was presented and clarifying questions were asked, and the board says we believe that this is the right thing to do, and the city commission says we accept and acknowledge that you have made this presentation and that we've had an opportunity to discuss it. I think when we talk about getting into too much of a micromanaging situation, I think that's what does happen when you start to talk about how many executives you have and how much you get paid. If the local reporter goes to the PUB meeting and discovers something like that, then the reporter has a responsibility to do something or report it. If the city commission discovers that that's something that they regard as irreverent or inappropriate, they have every right to challenge it in public and at the city commission meeting. But most of the PUB staffing determination for pay is done through studies that I believe, Mike, tell me, how often do you do pay studies or compensation studies for PUB directors and okay, somebody else has that answer. And that's enough from me.
Good afternoon, Emilia Guerra, I'm the Director of Human Resources. So currently we are going through a compensation study. We do them as often as we can. We also do a lot of internal market studies.
I'm sorry,
I'm
sorry to interrupt. Because we're recording this, could you speak into the mic, introduce yourself again?
Sure. Emilia Guerra, Director of Human Resources for PUB. So we are currently going through a compensation study, an external market study, But we do internal market studies when we can, when there is a budget for it. We have done some in the past. Doesn't happen every year, but we have done some. Does that answer your question?
Well, do you go to an outside consulting firm to be able to help you with and especially in your upper level management decision or positions, that's where you would do the study?
When we hire an outside consulting firm or even when we do internal market studies, we look at all positions. We try to do a certain percentage of positions per year.
Okay, so it's not, the one that you're currently doing is not you've ever done it.
No.
It's not, it may not be done every year, but it's done.
So the last external market study that we did with a consultant was in 2017.
Okay.
Started 2015, implemented in 2017. And this is the second time that we're using the same firm.
And those studies are presented to your board,
They are.
and then if your board makes a decision to raise a salary for administrative, for the top positions, that's a vote that takes place at the PUB board in the public, right?
The implementation of the study is presented to the board. The only salary approval that comes from the board, directly from the board, is for the general manager and CEO.
Okay. Thank you.
So then I would just like then to bring to your attention so that you can keep it in the back of your head. As far as ratifying the budget, obviously that, I guess, extreme. I would have suggested in my comments that we do it, discuss it together. Maybe they bring it before the city commission and it's just as a presentation. But as far as the salaries, I believe that the public deserves to have the top executive, specifically the CEO, his increases or her increases should be approved by the city along with the board, maybe suggested by the board commission, the PUB board, and then approved by the city commission. From what I understand, we had a 40% increase in salary for the CEO and the other top two executives during TANASCA. So if we had 130 plus million stolen from the taxpayers with that project, and we have a 40% increase in a salary of, I think that's really unfair for the ratepayers. So maybe not just, looking at the budget, so and evaluations, who does those? I don't know if that's the board or if that's the city commission, but how the 40% increase, how they came to that conclusion. Maybe it is the studies, I don't know, but I think that's something that the public would be very interested in.
So on that, I guess if there was going to be an approval as to salaries or budget, what would be a basis for withholding that approval? Because I guess you're going to have to go and say, look, we don't agree with this salary, it's too high, but then they'd have to come back with some sort of support, and I guess that's where you're getting at, is how do they come up to the numbers to determine what everyone should be paid? Or, because now you're looking at, well, qualifications, years of experience, and everything that goes into how they're basing salaries.
If I may, the way I would answer that is if there is a reliable, authoritative, professional survey or process by which a conclusion is reached for top staff, then that's an open book. In any presentation to the city commission, at my quarterly financial meeting, for instance, that would be a subject that a city commissioner could ask about. How did you determine that this is the right salary for your general manager? And it was a competitive process or whatever. And I've seen, I regret that I have seen it, but I have seen that sort of increase take place because of market conditions. And it's scary sometimes for the non-combatants, but it is a very competitive industry perhaps, and You could, those sort of things do happen. But that doesn't mean you couldn't explain it in the form, just as she has. Step up and say, here's the company that we hired, here's what they studied, here's what they found, here's the comparisons. This is why the board has decided to pay this.
Yeah, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think the idea of having an elected PUB board does address this issue. If we need a committee to evaluate whether the salary is appropriate and then hold the city, in the purpose of that, and I understand the purpose, and it's a good purpose, because, then the public can hold the commissioners accountable for approving that. But again, McAllen has this system where they elect their trustees, and to me, that just cuts out the red tape. The trustees will be held accountable to the public directly, and then we don't go down this route where we micromanage.
McAllen's is not anything at all electrical. It's public works type services that they provide. They have elected commissioners. I have a friend who served there for, I believe, on that board for 19 years. Their set of circumstances for one thing, is different from ours because they've got money more readily available to them than we do. But I don't think it's a comparable set of circumstances in terms of the level of complexity and the nature of the, especially with electrical extending services. So just,
that's.
Okay, so we're on number 2. Do we have any further questions or answers from our public on number 2? Motion to close.
I make a motion to close public hearing.
A second?
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those that oppose? Okay, so what's before us is the ratification of the budget for PUB.
Mr. Chairman, let me make a few comments. I'm the one that has suggested the ratifying of the budget, for PUB. This is another one of those where hopefully we can pass it, send it up to the city, let them decide if they want to go down that path. In terms of the compensation, I've been privy to, evaluations and reports and, consultants that come in and give you all these recommendations. And to use that as the litmus test is somewhat unfair, especially when we see our educators, not only in Brownsville, but educators throughout that get, salary adjustments. They get people that recommend teachers should be at this, at that. And some boards just don't, cannot afford to do it. At the end of the day, the ratepayers are the ones that are paying all these compensations. The ratepayers are the ones that are paying everybody's salaries there. They're paying for everything. So it's not a question of whether it's deserved, it's a question of affordability. And so I think that the city commission should be involved. It makes no, because who holds the PUB board members accountable today? Nobody does, unless you want to look at removing one per year. But right now, the way it stands, nobody holds the PUB board members, present and past, accountable for their actions. And the city commission can't even do that on a level that would make a whole lot of difference. So
Mr. Chairman.
I'm gonna stay quiet, but I will make a motion if nobody else does. If it passes, fine. If it doesn't, that's fine. On having the city commission ratify the PUB budget and also approve compensation to upper level management. They can define that being the CEO, CFO, whatever, on any increases that exceed 10%. That's where I stand on it right now.
Yep. Yeah, what I would add there is, I
Mr.
think,
Chairman, can I raise a point of order? Under Roberts, we're free to discuss this if somebody puts a motion on the floor, but the public hearing was actually where we should have been discussing it. If somebody I think somebody should make a motion, am I right? Somebody should make a motion, there should be a second, and
yeah,
then the
then
discussion.
I'll motion to Is it decline? Is a motion to?
Well, so we have a motion on the table.
We have a motion on the
I
table
don't,
by
I don't
Mr.
know if I
Cascos.
heard a second.
Did you motion?
I made a motion.
He made a
okay.
motion. So is there
And
a
the motion
second
was
to Mr. Cascos?
My motion is to have the city commission ratify the PUB budget and approve any compensation to upper management, and we can define that, anything in excess of 10% per year.
There's a motion on the table. There's a second.
So it dies for lack of a second.
One on that.
I'll make a motion next, if you, whichever. My motion would be similar to Mr. Costco's. My motion would be that the city commission require, that the PUB be required on an annual basis to present its budgets for clarification and acknowledgement rather than approval.
Okay.
That's my motion.
I think that already happened.
You already happened on number one, where you discussed the budget in your meetings.
The discussion took place. This would, in their fourth meeting on an annual basis, the proposal that I'm making is that the PUB would present their budget, answer all questions.
Correct.
Put everything out in the open, fully acknowledged. The city commission would have all the questions that they wanted to. They would acknowledge receipt of the report, but they would not be approving the report. That's my motion.
Right.
They do that already.
But, yeah, that's,
To put it in the charter?
didn't we say that on number one, where they would have the 4 meetings, one on water, electricity?
Yes,
And then at the end, the last meeting would be them going over the budget and any upcoming,
To clarify,
Yeah.
it was
There's
requiring
an
quarterly
annual
meetings.
report already required in the charter. Article 6, Section 4F.
Correct. There is an annual report required, but not a presentation of that report. And currently, we have a motion on the table. Unless it's
but under
amended,
my
you should call
understanding,
for a
did we cover
second.
that on the first one?
Well,
On your 4
just to
meetings?
clarify, no, I didn't try to include that. I'm not objecting to it, but I didn't try to include that in my motion, which was the 4 meetings that were workshops or work sessions.
Right.
I didn't try to include the specific presentation of a budget, which I think is what Mr. Costco's is getting to, is we need full disclosure of that budget. We need every opportunity to ask about and clarify anything in there. And that could occur at that same meeting, but that wasn't in my original motion early on.
And I guess to address Mr. Cascos's.
Just a point of order, if it dies for lack of a second, then we really shouldn't, but we either get a second or we don't discuss it.
Yeah, so I was wondering if Mr. Tejirina was going to second it. I don't know if that was part of his comments to second.
Well, I'll second that one.
Okay.
As far as the board acknowledging
The
budget?
receipt of the budget and
whether that's
clarification.
included in the first one or not, I mean, I think that's something that's.
It's a finer point, I may be.
Right.
So there's a motion and a second. All in favor?
Well,
Aye.
Discussion can continue now.
I just,
If somebody doesn't like what I'm saying, I
what
don't
is
mind
the-
hearing
What
it.
is the purpose of the acknowledgement as opposed to just having it available? Like, that's part of the discussion. That's where I'm tripped up.
Okay. I would say that that's a fine distinction to ask about. My point would be that it was acknowledged for the record, this came before the city commission. The city commission had every opportunity to clarify, ask questions, interpret, even to object to, and then acknowledge that it had been presented for the record.
Okay.
It would be in the minutes that the city commission said, yeah, we got it.
Yeah, to clarify, since there's a question, acknowledging would be putting it in the minutes that the body received it. It's just acknowledging. Otherwise, the minutes would show that PUB made a presentation on the financials, if you will. Now the minutes, if this passes, the minutes would be required to indicate that there was a motion and a second for the commission to accept or acknowledge the budget.
And so
As
kind of
reported.
The purpose then being, city, you had a chance, you didn't do it, we're going to hold you accountable.
Right.
City commissioners, next time you have anything to complain about,
It's like,
You had a chance.
if you didn't vote or you didn't show up to hear about it, then try not to complain too much.
Okay.
yeah, I mean, if that's the fine distinction, I think, I mean, maybe it's just change the word in the current charter to, or just add the word acknowledgement, I think, right? Is that what you're suggesting?
And that would be something that the city attorney might decide to recommend when it goes before the city commission, that that element could be incorporated into a single motion rather than or a single resolution rather than multiple.
Yeah, so just for clarification, as far as ballot or proposition language, we would be fine tuning it. So if it would be part of the first action, for example, then we would fine tune it for that. But right now, we are making individual recommendations on each aspect so that we can move forward rather than having like the whole motion declined if you had like a compound motion, if you will.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, again, I just don't want to micromanage, but I think the intentions are really, really important. But I think I think the people can hold them accountable already, for not,
We
in
may not get
reality,
enough.
like.
Yeah, it creates redundancy and, administrative burden and redundancy because it's already in the charter and can be implemented. We cannot micromanage to the level of, it's like we need to talk to every single person in city, city staff to inform them of what is in the charter. That, I don't think that's really our role. If it's already there and can be enforced, then it's not really up to us.
Yeah.
Well, I think our role is to have these discussions now so that the city commissioners have heard what our arguments are and where our positions are. And so, I mean, part of it just wants to submit it to the city, and then they've, what the public has to say and what we have to say. And so I thought that would be the point, is that if we come to a consensus that at least in some way this would be something that the city should consider, then we send it to them and let them have this argument. And I guess, I don't know if it's in the right order, but to Mr. Cascos' point as to the ratifying the budget, I mean, I don't know if I would agree with that, only because of the ability for them to unreasonably deny that acceptance. And so if there's something that the city would want to hear as to ratification, then it would be based on, would not be able to withhold or unreasonably deny the approval of the budget.
So, I mean, let's vote on it, right? You seconded.
First and second. Sorry.
I guess I'll just add, since we're still in discussion.
Okay, sorry.
Even though I kind of voted already. But the way I think about it is that we have the rate approval by the commission, and then we also have required financial, I don't know what the term would be, but financial obligations, I guess, keeping, what was it, 1.25 of, yeah, the debt service coverage ratios, right? So in a way, it's like everything in between those two things, as long as we can operate. Obviously, we also have the market itself, right, as an indicator to tell us how we are doing or how PUB is doing against, other entities or other utility providers. So it might not be like a physical lock, but there's already kind of boundary conditions there that, from my perspective, is adequate. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Okay.
Due to the discussion, when you all call for a vote, can we do a roll call vote?
I want to hear what the motion and second was again.
Okay.
Because I don't understand the apprehension to ratifying, or the difference between acknowledging and having the city to complain or to ask questions about it, and not being able to ratify the budget.
And I appreciate that.
I guess I'm a little hesitant.
I very much appreciate the fact that that is an issue. I will tell you that, here's what I would say. If you have a public company, you have a board of directors, and you have administrators, you have shareholders. The shareholders can come in and listen to the presentations. The boards have decided what the budget's going to be. At any point, the shareholders can choose to elect new board members or have a
I think you
challenge.
may want to talk to Twitter about
Yeah,
that, but okay.
and so, yeah, there's and that's the process that I think is somewhat parallel, not exactly to what we're talking about here. If the board of PUB, or if PUB and the board, their board, come back to the city commission and say, this is the budget that, based on your allowances for rate paying and capital expenditures, this is the budget that we recommend, and one commissioner or two says, I don't like that, then they have a right to challenge it. But do you want them to have a right to vote on it? And I personally believe that if you separate that arm's length separation that says, you can tell us you don't like it, you can ask a lot of questions, you may even influence us to change, but you are not here to ratify it. You've ratified the two most important things, the rates and the capital improvements. And you've named us as having a fiduciary responsibility for this. So we accept that fiduciary responsibility. We accept your decision on rates. We accept your decision on capital improvement. This is how much we think we ought to be spending. And this is the way we should spend it.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Right, so taking it a step further to ratify, what is the issue?
The issue becomes that at that point, and I'll tell you, if I were at Fitch, this is what I would say, what if the city commission doesn't want to ratify it? Is PUB stuck without the ability to have a budget?
No, because what happens when they don't ratify, it reverts back to the old budget, is how I understand it. They just
Well,
adopt the prior budget.
You could.
It's
you
not
could
unusual, it's happened before.
You
Not
could-
with PUB.
You could enforce it that way, and that, I'm not saying that that would be, I just don't, I think the arm's length relationship where you say, these are the rules, here's the stripes on the expressway. You're gonna get this much for rates, you have this much ability to spend for capital improvements, and you have this requirement to share this much money with us at the end
But
of
let
the
me,
year.
David, why would we not want to send it to the city commission and let the city commission decide that? If they don't want to say, look, we don't want to do that,
They are going to send it.
so you are going to send it?
Right, anything
You're gonna
against
say-
the client?
Yeah,
But if you send it to the city commission for a vote, that's the same as saying, we don't trust the board.
Right, I agree with
Well,
that.
I think that's what we're seeing today.
Well,
There is no trust, whether it's past or present, whether rightly or wrongly. Everybody keeps talking about the community and the ratepayers and the shareholders and all this other stuff, but we're ignoring the elephant in the room. There is a lack of trust with PUB today.
And
then
all of-
how do you hold them accountable?
Well,
right?
that's
And
right.
that's where
That's right, Michael. We have no mechanism right now, as we sit here today, to hold board members, past or present, accountable to the ratepayers.
Actually, those motions that I've made address that very directly, and they address the issue, not the personalities. The issue is.
Well, I'm not dealing with personalities. I'm
Well,
talking about the facts. I mean, this is what we have today. So.
And
if you
what
can
I'm
make
trying
your-
to do is
if
create
you
a
can make
posi-
your motion again, so I can understand it.
Okay.
In 25 words or less. Okay, if we can,
Just-
so I can
Just to clarify, I would just say, my point of these several motions is that we're adding to the system provisions which reduce the likelihood of obfuscation, of misleading, of lack of transparency. All of the motions that I've made, and I'm not a genius, I'm just suggesting that these are good, these are ways that we can put in place things that protect us against this happening again.
David, but how does that not micromanage the independent agency?
Micromanaging would be going to them and saying, instead of doing this project, we want you to do
Right.
this project. Micromanaging would be going to them and saying, instead of having a chief engineering officer, we want you to have a chief compliance officer.
Isn't it just death by 1,000 cuts, though? I mean,
That would be, yes, and I live under that today. But what I'm saying is, if we create the framework that allows for the information to flow the way it should, and we say the penalty for this is breach of, if the board is in breach of fiduciary responsibility, city council, putting a black cloud over that
Okay, so
PUB
David,
board.
the motion is?
So,
I'm sorry.
if I may I read the motion as we understand it?
Yeah,
And then, of course, Mr. Merrill can modify it or correct us. But this is for our records, of course. Require PUB to present the budget for clarification and acknowledgement of receipt of the report. And there was a little caveat, not approving it, which will modify the language. But that's the motion as we understood it.
David, would you would you be okay if it said like acknowledgement, not approval?
Right, yes.
Could that be
Well,
included?
And that's how we have it.
So that is how you have it?
That's how we have it.
Acknowledgement, but with the words not approval?
Not approving it.
Okay. I think we can vote.
And the grammar would be that the point is that we're acknowledging it, we don't necessarily like it, or we're not voting to approve it, but we acknowledge that we've received the report.
Okay, so then how does that improve the city commission's oversight over PUB?
Two ways. The first is that that PUB, although they have made presentations as recently as a year ago about particular topics at the request of the city commission, in this case, they would come to a workshop session where where they would present just as they had to their own board, they would present, here is our budget for the coming year, here are our capital needs, here's our they would go through it. And city commissioners would have the right at that point to say, I don't understand why you're doing that. Why are you doing that? And the PUB would be obliged to explain it.
Why would they be obliged to answer anything if there's no teeth in it?
Because if they don't,
What?
then they become in breach of the fiduciary responsibility that they have to the
I don't
city.
think that in and of itself is a breach of fiduciary responsibility.
I guarantee that it is.
As we're defining it
I think
today.
it's just a political decision.
No, it's not, I'm sorry. And let's assume for a moment that you're correct, that there's no teeth to that. Do you object to the concept of their coming before the city commission, making that report and providing it to the city?
No. I mean, I totally agree with that other caveat about the city having skin in the game and ratifying their budget. I mean, I just don't see what the issue is.
I have an issue with the independent decision-making, which
Well, I
Bench
mean,
made.
if it's a good budget, then the city's got no reason to oppose it.
So, I mean, but if you're
Well, good
having
can mean
them,
different things.
if you're having them approve every, I guess, salary, so then what happens if they say, we're not going to approve the CEO's salary, and then the CEO says, well, then I'm not going to work here anymore, and he goes
Then
and
you
gets a
find another
better job.
CEO.
I mean,
But
isn't
now
it-
you're impacting the individuals that PUB has had for
Well,
years.
but it's their decision to make.
And so then just have the city commission hire.
See, and then
Or,
there you
or
go.
just ratify that. I'm talking about any compensation that exceeds 10%, that come back to the city and have the city approve it.
How
Why
is
would
it-
this- If it's warranted, why would the city not approve it?
We're going down, Finch looked at its crystal ball and they knew what was going to happen.
Well,
They
I think
knew-
the problem, Mike, I think you're right. I think the problem that we've had over the last 48 months has been the lack of city supervision and oversight over PUB.
And I think this quickest, most accountable to the public solution is let them be elected officials.
I have no problem with that. I have no problem, as a matter of, and again, as I prefaced earlier, we shouldn't be, I don't think that we should be argumentative amongst us. I mean, I think, look,
Yeah,
let's come up with these presentations, rightly or wrongly, let's vote on them. If it passes, great. If it doesn't, send it to the city commission.
Well, at the same
Let
time,
them-
if we.
Mr. Chairman, I call the
Change it
question.
anyway.
Go ahead.
Chair,
I call the
I'm still trying to-
question.
I'm still
Yeah.
trying to hear the motion, though, David.
yeah, I think he,
I will read it again.
Please.
Yes.
Require BPUB to present the budget for clarification and acknowledgement of receipt, not approving it.